Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock reunite on his 61st birthday, and what she did left him speechless. Keanu Reeves was never someone who liked big celebrations or loud attention. While many Hollywood stars enjoyed flashing cameras, large parties, and headlines written about their every move, Keanu was different. He preferred quiet moments, long motorcycle rides, or sitting alone in a cafe with a book. For him, birthdays were usually simple days. He didn't mind if they passed by quietly, as long as he spent them with a few people who meant something real to him. This year, however, was a little different. He was turning 61, and though the number didn't scare him, it did make him pause and reflect on the journey of his life. On the morning of his birthday, Keanu woke up in his modest Los Angeles home. Sunlight poured through the curtains, and for a moment he just sat on the edge of his bed, thinking. He remembered his younger days, how quickly time had moved, and how different life had become. Fame had come early in his career, but he had never been the type to chase it. He had seen both the bright lights and the dark corners of the film industry, yet he managed to keep his feet on the ground. Perhaps that was why people admired him so much, because he had never lost his kindness, even when the world expected him to change. That morning, his phone buzzed with messages from fans and friends. Social media was flooded with warm wishes, pictures, and short video edits celebrating his work in movies. He smiled at some of them, especially those created by longtime fans who remembered not only The Matrix and John Wick but also his earlier projects. He appreciated the effort, but he didn't let it distract him too much. For Keanu, real connections mattered more than online attention. He quietly made himself a cup of coffee, put on a plain black t-shirt and jeans, and prepared for what he thought would be an ordinary day. A little later, his phone rang. The name on the screen made him pause, and then a genuine smile stretched across his face. It was Sandra Bullock. Their friendship had started decades earlier when they worked together on the movie Speed. Back then, they were young actors filled with excitement, and their chemistry had been so natural that fans often wondered if they had been close off-screen too. The truth was, their bond had gone deeper than a simple co-star relationship. They had built a connection based on mutual respect, laughter, and an understanding of how difficult life in Hollywood could be. Even when years passed and projects pulled them in different directions, they had never lost touch completely. Keanu answered the call, and Sandra's warm, playful voice greeted him. "Happy birthday, old man," she teased, though her tone carried affection. He chuckled softly and thanked her. Sandra then surprised him with an invitation. She asked if he could meet her that evening at a private place in Los Angeles. She didn't explain much, only saying it would be a small get-together. Keanu, being naturally humble and curious, didn't ask too many questions. He simply agreed. After all, spending time with Sandra was always something he enjoyed. She had a way of making even the simplest moment feel special. Throughout the day, Keanu continued with his usual routine. He read a few pages from a book, took a short walk outside, and even greeted a couple of fans who had politely asked for a photo. True to his nature, he treated them kindly, listening to their words of admiration instead of brushing them off. That was the thing about Keanu: he never saw himself as more important than anyone else. He knew fame was temporary, but kindness lasted forever. As the evening approached, Keanu got ready to leave for Sandra's invitation. He didn't overthink what to wear. A comfortable suit, simple but elegant, was enough. He rode his motorcycle through the city, the cool wind brushing against him. Riding always cleared his mind, reminding him of freedom and balance. By the time he arrived at the address Sandra had sent, he felt calm and open to whatever the night had in store. What Keanu didn't know was that Sandra had been preparing something quietly behind the scenes. For weeks, she had been reaching out to a few people, mutual friends, colleagues, and even crew members from their old films. She had asked them to share small notes or memories about Keanu. Her plan was not to throw him a grand party with flashing lights, but to create an evening filled with meaning. She knew Keanu didn't care for Hollywood glamour, so she made sure everything about the gathering reflected who he truly was: humble, thoughtful, and deeply human. When Keanu stepped inside, he was greeted by a warm atmosphere. The place wasn't crowded or noisy. Instead, it had soft lighting, comfortable seating, and a sense of intimacy. Sandra stood there waiting, her bright smile immediately making him feel at ease. "You made it," she said cheerfully, giving him a friendly hug. Keanu returned the gesture, feeling grateful already. As the night began, he realized that this wasn't just a casual dinner. It felt like something more, something personal. But Sandra didn't reveal everything at once. She wanted the evening to unfold slowly, letting Keanu enjoy each moment. For now, he was simply happy to be reunited with a dear friend on such a meaningful day. Inside, the walls carried subtle decorations. At first, Keanu didn't notice, but then his eyes caught sight of something familiar. There were photographs, old stills from Speed, moments from the lake house, and even behind-the-scenes shots that he had long forgotten about. They were framed neatly, telling the story of their shared journey through the years. He paused in front of one picture, a candid shot where he and Sandra were laughing between takes. The memory rushed back, and for the first time that day, Keanu's usually calm expression softened with a hint of nostalgia. Sandra noticed his reaction and playfully said, "You haven't changed much, you know. Maybe just the hair." Keanu laughed, shaking his head, and replied, "I think time has been kinder to you." Their light-hearted exchange set the tone for the evening. It wasn't about fame or career highlights, it was about friendship, memory, and the rare kind of bond that survives decades. For Keanu, the simple act of being there, surrounded by familiar warmth, already made his birthday special. He didn't need luxury or noise. What mattered to him was authenticity, and Sandra had given him exactly that. Though he didn't know what else she had prepared, he felt something different about this evening. Deep down, he sensed that it would be a birthday unlike any other, one that would stay in his heart for a very long time. And as the first part of the night settled in, Keanu realized something he had always believed: sometimes, the best gifts in life are not things at all, they are people who remind you that you are valued, remembered, and truly cared for. Keanu had always enjoyed simple moments, but that evening felt different right from the start. As soon as he stepped inside the cozy place Sandra had chosen, he could sense that something special was waiting. The quiet hum of music floated in the background, and the soft glow of lights gave the space a warm, welcoming feeling. Sandra moved around gracefully, making sure everything was running smoothly. She had always been thoughtful like that, paying attention to little details that made a big difference. Keanu looked around, thinking it would just be him, Sandra, and maybe one or two close friends. But as he walked further inside, he began to notice familiar faces. One by one, people stepped forward, friends he hadn't seen in years, colleagues who had once shared sets with him, even a couple of directors who had guided his early projects. They all greeted him with genuine smiles, and for a moment, Keanu was taken aback. He had not expected this at all. Sandra came over and laughed softly at his surprised expression. "You thought it was going to be just dinner, didn't you?" she teased. He nodded, still stunned, and admitted that he had. She gently patted his arm and said, "Well, sometimes life deserves a little more celebration than you're willing to give it." Everyone gathered around a long table set with care. There were no fancy decorations, just simple flowers and candles that gave the room a peaceful charm. Keanu liked it instantly. It wasn't loud or overdone, it felt genuine, the kind of atmosphere where conversations could flow freely and people could laugh without feeling watched. He sat down among them, still smiling, his eyes shining with both gratitude and disbelief. As the evening began, stories started to flow. One of his old co-stars told a funny memory from a movie set, recalling how Keanu had stayed behind late at night to help the crew pack up equipment. You were already the star of the film, the person said, but you never acted like you were above us. That's what made everyone respect you. The table filled with laughter and nods of agreement. Keanu tried to wave off the compliment, but inside, his heart was touched. Sandra, sitting across from him, watched carefully. She had arranged this gathering not just to celebrate his birthday but to remind him of the quiet impact he had made on so many people. She knew Keanu wasn't the type to dwell on his influence, so she had decided to show him through the voices of others. As the night went on, the room grew warmer, not just from the candles but from the connections being rekindled. Friends who hadn't seen each other in years shared hugs and inside jokes. A director who had worked with Keanu decades ago spoke about how he always arrived on set early, ready to give his best. "You never let success change you," the director said. And that's rare. Keanu listened quietly, as he often did. He had never been someone who liked the spotlight, even in a room full of friends. Instead, he preferred to let others speak, giving them his full attention. But as each story came, he couldn't deny the warmth building inside him. These weren't just memories, they were pieces of his life that others had carried with them, pieces that reminded him of the relationships he had built beyond the camera. At one point, a small group stepped forward holding a guitar. They began to play a gentle tune, one that Keanu instantly recognized. It was a song from his younger days, one he used to play with his own band. He chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. Sandra leaned closer and whispered, "I thought you might like a little music to go with the memories." Keanu smiled, his eyes lighting up. The sound of the guitar filled the room, and for a moment, it felt like time had slowed down. He wasn't the famous actor everyone knew, he was just Keanu, a man surrounded by people who cared about him. As dinner was served, Sandra raised her glass for a toast. Everyone followed, their eyes turning toward Keanu. Sandra's voice was warm but steady. "Tonight is about celebrating a man who has given so much without ever asking for anything in return. Keanu, you've shown us that kindness and humility are not weaknesses but strengths. You've been a friend, a guide, and an example. And on your birthday, we just wanted to remind you of how much you mean to all of us." The room filled with the soft sound of glasses clinking together, followed by applause. Keanu, usually so composed, found himself speechless. He lowered his head slightly, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes, but Sandra caught it. She smiled knowingly, proud that her plan was working. After the toast, people continued to share memories. Some were funny, like the time Keanu accidentally drove the wrong car off a film set, only to return later laughing about the mistake. Others were touching, like the story of how he once bought lunch for an entire crew after a long day of shooting. Each story painted the same picture, a man who never let fame erase his humanity. Sandra herself added a few light-hearted stories, recalling how they would joke between takes on Speed and how they once spent hours laughing over a silly inside joke no one else understood. "Those were the days," she said with a grin. Keanu laughed with her, remembering the simplicity of those times. The more the night went on, the more Keanu realized what Sandra had done. She had gathered not just people, but memories. Each person in the room was a reflection of his journey, and together, they had created a mosaic of moments that made his life meaningful. It wasn't about awards or fame, it was about the connections that had lasted, the laughter that still echoed, and the kindness that had returned to him in the form of love and respect. By the time dessert was served, the evening had taken on a rhythm of its own. Conversations overlapped, laughter filled the air, and Keanu found himself relaxed in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He leaned back in his chair, simply listening, letting the joy of the moment wash over him. Sandra caught his eye from across the table. She gave him a small smile, as if to say, "This is only the beginning." Keanu didn't fully understand what she meant, but he trusted her. She had always known how to surprise him in ways that touched his heart. As the evening drew on, Keanu couldn't help but feel grateful. What had started as a simple invitation had turned into one of the most meaningful celebrations of his life. And though he didn't know it yet, Sandra still had something else planned, something that would leave him completely speechless before the night was over. The evening carried on with warmth and laughter, and Keanu felt lighter than he had in a long time. Every story, every smile, every laugh reminded him of the good moments that fame couldn't erase. Still, he had a sense that the night was not yet complete. Sandra had a way about her, she never revealed all her plans at once. It was part of her charm. She always liked to let things unfold slowly, giving each moment its own special shine. After dinner, the group moved into another room that Sandra had carefully arranged. At first glance, Keanu thought it was just a lounge with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. But then he noticed something that made him pause. On one wall, a small projector was set up, facing a blank canvas. He tilted his head curiously, not sure what was coming. Sandra smiled at him knowingly, as if she had been waiting for this moment all evening. "Sit down, birthday boy," she said lightly, guiding him toward a chair in the center. Keanu obeyed, still confused but amused. The others settled in as well, their faces glowing with anticipation. Sandra dimmed the lights, and suddenly the projector came to life. The screen flickered, and the first image appeared. It was a photo from decades ago, a candid picture of Keanu on the set of Speed. He was young, energetic, and smiling, with Sandra standing beside him. The room filled with laughter and cheers as everyone recognized the memory. Keanu chuckled quietly, shaking his head at how much time had passed. But then, something unexpected happened. The photos transitioned into a video, and suddenly a familiar face appeared on screen. It was one of the crew members from Speed, speaking directly to the camera. "Keanu, happy birthday," the person said warmly. "I just want to thank you for all those late nights you stayed behind to help us pack up equipment. You didn't have to, but you did. That kind of kindness stays with people forever." Keanu blinked, surprised. He hadn't spoken to that person in years. Yet here they were, reaching out to him across time, reminding him of something he himself barely remembered. The video continued, moving from one message to another. Former co-stars, directors, makeup artists, and assistants, people from all parts of his journey appeared one after another. Some shared funny moments, others spoke of his generosity, and a few simply wished him well with heartfelt words. The room grew quiet as everyone watched. Even the people present, who already knew Keanu well, were touched by the sincerity of the messages. Keanu, who rarely showed much emotion in public, felt a lump forming in his throat. He wasn't used to hearing such words spoken about him, especially not all at once. Sandra sat nearby, watching his reaction closely. She had worked hard to put this together. It wasn't easy tracking down so many people from different times in his career, but she had done it because she knew Keanu deserved to hear what he meant to others. She knew he often underestimated his own impact, so this was her way of reminding him. The video shifted again, this time showing clips of fans. There were short recordings from around the world, people holding up signs, families gathered together, individuals speaking directly to him. They talked about how his movies had helped them during difficult times, how his kindness in interviews had inspired them, and how his humility had taught them that fame didn't have to change a person. One fan, a young woman, said softly, "When I lost my father, watching your films gave me comfort. The characters you played made me feel like I wasn't alone. Thank you for that." Another man added, "I met you once outside a theater. You stopped to talk to me, even though you were in a hurry. That small moment changed how I treat others to this day." Keanu's eyes watered as he listened. He didn't see himself as a hero, yet here were people explaining how much he had meant to them. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the screen. The messages kept coming, one after another, until the room felt heavy with emotion. Sandra reached out and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. See, you've touched lives in ways you don't even realize. The video montage ended with something that made Keanu laugh through his tears. It was a clip from years ago, an old blooper reel from the lake house. He and Sandra were trying to film a serious scene, but both kept bursting into laughter. The reel showed take after take ruined by their giggles. The room erupted with laughter, breaking the emotional tension and reminding everyone of the joy that had always surrounded his career. When the screen finally faded to black, the room was silent for a moment. Everyone looked toward Keanu, waiting to see his reaction. He sat quietly, his usual calm demeanor hiding the storm of feelings inside him. Finally, he smiled a small, humble smile and whispered, "Thank you." Sandra squeezed his shoulder and said, "Don't thank me. Thank everyone here. They wanted you to know what you've given them." Keanu nodded, unable to find more words. He wasn't the type to give long speeches, and that was fine. His silence spoke louder than anything. Everyone understood that he was deeply moved. The group slowly began to clap, not loudly, but with genuine affection. It wasn't applause for a performance, it was a gesture of love for a man who had given so much of himself without ever asking for recognition. As the lights came back on, Keanu took a deep breath and stood up. He walked slowly around the room, hugging people one by one, thanking them personally. Each hug was sincere, each thank you genuine. He didn't rush through it. For him, every person there mattered. Sandra watched with a soft smile on her face. This was exactly what she had hoped for. She had wanted to give Keanu a night he would never forget, one that went beyond simple celebration. She wanted to remind him that his presence in this world had made a difference, not just in the industry but in the lives of countless people. When he finally reached her, he paused. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words were needed, but Keanu whispered anyway, "You didn't have to do all this." Sandra smiled playfully. "I know. But I wanted to. You've given so much, Keanu. Tonight, it was our turn to give something back." Keanu pulled her into a hug, longer than the others, filled with quiet gratitude. In that embrace, Sandra felt his appreciation, not just for the evening but for the years of friendship they had shared. The night continued with lighter moments. People returned to their conversations, some laughing, others reminiscing about old times. But for Keanu, the highlight had already passed. The video had left a mark on his heart, one that would stay with him long after the night ended. As he sat back down, he realized something important. Birthdays had never meant much to him before, but this one was different. This wasn't just about turning 61, it was about realizing that his life had been meaningful in ways he hadn't recognized. It was about seeing the ripple effect of kindness, about understanding that the small things he had done had created waves in the lives of others. And as he looked around the room, at the faces of people who truly cared, he felt something rare in Hollywood: genuine love, untainted by fame or expectation. For the first time in years, Keanu allowed himself to fully receive it. The night had already been unforgettable for Keanu. The gathering, the stories, the laughter, and the video had left him both humbled and speechless. He had thought the evening had reached its peak, but Sandra wasn't finished yet. She had one more surprise waiting, something that she had planned carefully, knowing it would touch his heart in a way few things could. After the video ended and the room returned to soft chatter, Sandra quietly slipped away for a moment. Keanu didn't notice at first. He was still processing everything he had seen, still feeling the weight of the messages from people who had crossed his path over the years. But soon, the lights dimmed again, and the room grew quiet. Everyone turned their attention toward the front, where Sandra stood with a small box in her hands. She looked around at the group, then at Keanu, and said with a gentle smile, "There's one more thing we'd like to share with you tonight." Keanu raised his eyebrows in curiosity, unsure of what else could possibly come after everything he had already experienced. Sandra set the box on the table beside her and opened it slowly. From inside, she pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. Its cover was simple, but its weight suggested that it carried something important. She held it carefully, like it was a treasure. "This," she explained, "is a collection of letters, notes, and stories written just for you. We reached out to people from all parts of your life, friends, co-stars, crew members, even fans, and asked them to write down what they remembered most about you. We put it all together here." The room grew still as she walked toward Keanu and placed the book in his hands. He looked down at it, his fingers brushing over the cover, his expression filled with quiet awe. He opened the first page and saw a handwritten note from an old director he had worked with early in his career. The words were heartfelt, thanking him for his dedication and kindness. Turning the page, he found a letter from a fan who had been inspired by his generosity in real life. Page after page was filled with stories, memories, and messages of gratitude. Keanu's eyes softened as he read a few lines aloud. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of emotion. "Keanu, thank you for treating everyone with respect, no matter their role." Another line read, "You gave me courage during one of the hardest times in my life." Each note was deeply personal, and Keanu's usually steady composure began to waver. He closed the book gently, holding it close to his chest. Sandra, watching him carefully, stepped forward again. "This isn't just a gift," she said softly. "It's a reminder. Sometimes we go through life not realizing how many people we've touched, how many lives we've changed just by being ourselves. Tonight, we wanted you to see that clearly." For a long moment, Keanu sat silently, his hand resting on the book. He looked around the room at the faces smiling back at him. They weren't expecting a speech, they weren't waiting for some grand gesture, they were simply there to share in the moment. And that, he realized, was the real gift. To ease the heavy emotion, Sandra clapped her hands lightly and said, "But wait, there's more." The group laughed, and Keanu chuckled, shaking his head at her playful energy. She always had a way of balancing serious moments with humor. The next surprise was even more personal. Sandra led Keanu to a corner of the room where a large easel was covered with a cloth. With a quick motion, she pulled the cloth away to reveal a painting. It was a hand-painted portrait of Keanu on his motorcycle, riding through the streets with the wind in his hair. But what made it special was the detail the artist had captured, not just his likeness but his spirit. The freedom in his eyes, the calm strength in his posture, the sense of peace that came from being on the open road. Keanu stared at the painting, speechless once again. He had always loved motorcycles, and anyone close to him knew that riding was more than a hobby, it was a way of life. Seeing himself portrayed in that way touched him deeply. He walked closer, examining the brush strokes, the colors, the feeling behind the art. Finally, he turned to Sandra and said in a quiet voice, "This is beautiful." "Thank you." Sandra smiled. "It's from all of us. We wanted you to have something that reflected who you are, not just as an actor but as a person." The room applauded softly, and Keanu bowed his head humbly. He wasn't used to so much attention, but he appreciated every thought that had gone into the evening. As the night continued, the mood shifted back to light-hearted fun. Music played softly in the background, and people began sharing more casual stories. Some danced, others sang along to old songs, and a few gathered in small groups to chat. But throughout it all, Keanu kept glancing at the book in his hands and the painting on the easel. They weren't just gifts, they were symbols of something far greater, the love and respect he had earned over the years by simply being himself. At one point, Sandra sat down beside him with 2 cups of coffee. They sipped quietly, watching everyone else enjoy themselves. Sandra leaned over and said, "You know, I had to work hard to keep this a secret." You're not easy to surprise. Keanu laughed softly. You did a good job. I really had no idea. She tilted her head, studying him. Was it worth it? He looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude. More than worth it? This means more than I can ever say. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, their friendship stronger than ever. Neither needed to say much, their bond had always been built on understanding rather than words. Later in the evening, someone suggested taking a group photo to remember the night. Everyone gathered around, squeezing together with laughter and playful shouts about where to stand. Keanu stood in the middle, Sandra beside him, the book still in his hand. The photographer counted down, and in that moment, Keanu realized something profound. He had never cared much about birthdays, but this one would stay with him forever. Not because of the gifts, but because of the love that had surrounded him. When the picture was taken, Sandra whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Happy birthday, Keanu. You deserve all of this and more." The evening slowly wound down, but the feeling in Keanu's heart only grew stronger. He had come expecting a simple dinner and had walked into a night filled with memories, surprises, and heartfelt gestures. He knew that even long after the candles were blown out and the guests had gone home, he would carry this night with him always. As the last of the guests began to leave, Keanu lingered in the quiet room with Sandra. They looked at the painting, the book, and the empty chairs that had been filled with laughter only moments before. "You've given me something I'll never forget," he told her sincerely. Sandra smiled, her eyes soft. That was the plan. For Keanu, the night had been more than a birthday celebration. It had been a reminder of the power of friendship, the importance of gratitude, and the beauty of being surrounded by people who truly cared. And though he rarely put his feelings into words, everyone in that room knew the truth. It had touched him in a way he would never forget. The night had reached its quietest hour. The laughter had faded, the soft music had lowered, and most of the guests had left with warm hugs and cheerful goodbyes. Only a handful of people remained, lingering for a final chat or helping tidy up the space. Keanu stood near the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, the lights twinkling like stars spread across the ground. For a man who preferred simplicity, the evening had been almost overwhelming, but in the most beautiful way. Sandra walked up beside him, holding 2 glasses of water. She handed him one and leaned casually against the window frame. "So," she said with a playful grin, "did I manage to make your 61st birthday a little less boring than you expected?" Keanu let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "You did more than that. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed." His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it that showed how deeply he meant those words. Sandra smiled warmly. "Good. That was the goal." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks. Keanu looked down at the leather-bound book resting on the nearby table. He had placed it there carefully, as if it were something fragile. Every now and then, his eyes drifted toward it, like he still couldn't believe it was real. The painting stood in the corner, leaning against the wall, glowing softly under the dim lights. These gifts weren't just objects. They were reminders, pieces of love, memories, and gratitude that had been collected and handed back to him. As the last few guests finally said their goodbyes and the room grew quiet, Keanu and Sandra were left alone. The space felt different now, calmer, almost sacred. Sandra walked over to the table, picked up the book, and handed it to him again. "Promise me you'll read every page," she said softly. "I will," Keanu replied, holding it close to his chest. "I'll take my time with it." "These words deserve that." Sandra nodded. "They do. And so do you." Keanu didn't always know how to respond to kindness. For so many years, he had been the one giving quietly, helping others without seeking recognition. To be on the receiving end like this was unusual, almost uncomfortable, but also moving in a way he couldn't fully express. They sat down together, the room now lit only by a few candles still burning low. Sandra rested her head on her hand, studying him for a moment. "You know what struck me tonight?" she asked. "What's that?" Keanu replied. "That all those people, from fans to co-stars, had one thing in common. They didn't talk about your movies first. They talked about you. The person you are when the cameras aren't rolling. That says more than any award ever could." Keanu thought about that, letting her words settle in. He had never cared much for awards or trophies, but hearing that his character had left such an impression meant more than anything. "Maybe," he said slowly, "the real legacy isn't what we do on screen, but how we treat people when no one's watching." Sandra smiled. "Exactly." The two friends fell into a deep conversation, drifting from memories of their time working together to reflections on life and aging. They laughed about how young and clueless they had been during Speed, how they never imagined the movie would become a classic. They reminisced about the lake house and the quiet joy of filming something so different. And they talked about the years in between, the struggles, the lessons, the growth. Keanu listened as Sandra spoke about her own life, her children, and the things that mattered most to her now. In her words, he heard echoes of his own values, the belief that love, kindness, and friendship were worth more than fame or wealth. It made him realize once again why their bond had lasted so long. After a while, Sandra leaned back and looked at him seriously. "You know, Keanu, you've spent so much of your life giving to others. I just wanted, for one night, to make sure you received something back. You deserve it." Keanu lowered his gaze, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Sandra. For everything. For tonight, for the friendship, for always being there." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Always," she said simply. The candles burned lower, and eventually, it was time to leave. They gathered the last of their things, making sure the painting and book were safely packed for Keanu to take home. As they stepped outside, the cool night air brushed against them. The city was quieter now, the streets less crowded, and Keanu felt a sense of peace wash over him. Sandra hugged him tightly before they parted. "Happy birthday, Keanu," she whispered again. "Don't forget tonight." "I won't," he promised. "Not ever." He rode home on his motorcycle, the book secured carefully in his bag and the painting tied safely behind him. The wind rushed past, carrying away the noise of the city, leaving only the rhythm of the road and the echo of the evening in his mind. For once, instead of thinking about the past or the future, Keanu allowed himself to simply be present. He replayed the laughter, the stories, the surprise of the video, the weight of the letters, and Sandra's thoughtful planning. Each moment felt like a gift he could unwrap again and again in his memory. When he finally arrived home, the house was quiet, just as he liked it. He placed the painting carefully against the wall in his living room, where it caught the soft glow of a lamp. Then he set the book on his table, running his hand over the leather cover once more. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat down, and opened the first page again. The words greeted him like old friends. He read slowly, savoring each sentence. Some made him smile, others brought a sting of tears to his eyes, but all of them filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Hours slipped by without him noticing. By the time he closed the book again, the sky outside had begun to pale with the first light of dawn. Keanu leaned back in his chair, the quiet morning wrapping around him. He felt tired but peaceful. This birthday had been unlike any other. It wasn't about gifts or parties, but about being reminded that he mattered, that his kindness, humility, and humanity had touched people in ways he had never realized. For a man who often lived quietly in the background of his own fame, this night had brought him to the center in the most meaningful way. And though words rarely came easily to him, he whispered softly into the morning air, as if speaking to the universe itself, "Thank you. The day ahead would be like any other." He would ride his motorcycle, stop for coffee, maybe read another book. But inside, something had shifted. His 61st birthday had become more than a milestone. It had become a symbol of what really mattered in life: friendship, gratitude, and the simple yet powerful truth that being kind leaves an echo that never fades. And somewhere, he knew Sandra was smiling too, proud that she had managed to give him not just a celebration but a memory that would stay with him forever.